The first thing Atlas found beneath the mountain cabin was not gold, not old money, not a forgotten family treasure, but a map that could have made an entire town go silent. Nathan Cole stood in the hidden stone room under his grandmother's kitchen with a flashlight trembling slightly in his hand, the beam stretched across a wall-sized map of Cedar Hollow, Montana, where every creek, spring, pipe, and mountain runoff channel had been marked in red ink. The air below the cabin was cold enough to raise breath from his mouth, yet dry, carrying the scent of cedar beams, stone dust, old paper, and water moving somewhere deep beneath the floor. Above him, the cabin floorboards creaked softly in the night wind, but down here the silence felt protected, as if the mountain had been holding its breath for years. Nathan was 40 years old, a white American veteran with broad shoulders, a weathered but kind face, short dark blonde hair, pale gray eyes, a white scar near his left eyebrow, and light stubble along a jaw that rarely showed what he felt. He wore a worn denim shirt beneath a faded field jacket, both marked by years of work, rain, and quiet endurance. His boots were dusty from the crawl beneath the kitchen, and one sleeve was smeared with soot from the old wood stove he had moved aside an hour earlier. Beside him stood Atlas, his 6-year-old German shepherd, sable and tan with a black saddle across his back, a cream-colored chest, a slightly silver muzzle, alert amber eyes, and a simple working dog harness. Atlas had not barked since they entered the room. That worried Nathan more than noise would have. The dog only stood beside a metal file box in the corner, his nose resting near a strip of yellow tape on the lid, his body still with the focus he used when something mattered beyond ordinary understanding. Nathan crossed to him slowly. The file box was old, military green, its paint chipped along the corners, its brass latch dark with age. On top of it, written in his grandmother Evelyn Cole's careful hand, were words Nathan had to read twice before his mind accepted them. If they fire him for telling the truth, give him mine. The sentence seemed impossible, not because his grandmother could not have written it, but because she had died 3 weeks before Nathan lost his job. 5 days earlier, he had walked out of Whitaker Timber with a cardboard box under one arm and the last of his steady pay folded into a final check. He had not shouted. He had not begged. He had simply stood in Carl Whitaker's office while the mill owner slid the paper across the desk and told him that a man who refused to sign a routine land assessment report was not a team player. Routine, Carl had called it, though Nathan had seen the missing water survey numbers, the erased slope notes, the quiet pressure to label Cedar Ridge safe for expanded cutting before the county hearing. Nathan had served in the Army Corps of Engineers long enough to know when land was being made to say something false. He had seen what water could do when people ignored it. He had looked at the report, then at Carl, and said he would not put his name on it. That was all. By noon, he was standing in the gravel lot outside the mill, the November air sharp with pine resin and sawdust, while men he had worked beside for 2 years avoided his eyes. His old pickup waited near the fence, rust on the wheel wells, windshield cracked in one corner, heater unreliable but still trying. Atlas sat upright in the passenger seat, watching him through the glass with the calm loyalty of a creature who did not need explanations to know when the world had shifted under his person's feet. Nathan opened the door, placed the box on the seat, and rested his hand on the dog's head. Atlas pressed upward into his palm. For a moment, that was the only thing holding Nathan together. He had lost the room he rented behind the hardware store because the rent was due Friday. He had less than $200 in checking. He had a truck, a dog, a toolbox, and a name that had just cost him the last job in town willing to hire a man who preferred silence to small talk. Then his phone rang. The number belonged to Martha Briggs, the town attorney who had handled his grandmother's affairs. Nathan almost let it go to voicemail, but something in the cold air made him answer. Martha's voice was gentle, careful, the way people speak when they are about to place grief and paperwork into the same sentence. "Nathan," she said, "your grandmother left you something." "Not money," she added after a pause. "A cabin on Cedar Ridge. There is also an envelope she instructed me to give you by hand." Nathan looked through the windshield toward the mountains rising beyond the mill, dark with pine and early snow. In the passenger seat, Atlas suddenly lifted his head, ears forward, amber eyes fixed on the same ridge. Nathan had not said Cedar Ridge aloud, but the dog had heard something anyway. Nathan drove to Martha Briggs's office with the final paycheck folded in his shirt pocket, and the cardboard box of his work things rattling on the floorboard beneath Atlas's paws. Cedar Hollow looked smaller that afternoon, as if losing a job had shrunk the whole town around him. The mill whistle still blew at 2 o'clock, the diner still steamed its windows with coffee and soup, and the hardware store still kept a row of snow shovels outside like winter was a customer expected any minute. But Nathan felt as though he were moving behind glass, close enough to the world to see it clearly, too far away to belong to it. Atlas sat straight in the passenger seat, his sable antan coat catching the pale mountain light, his black saddle markings dark against the worn vinyl, his cream chest rising with steady breaths. Every few blocks, the German shepherd glanced toward the ridge beyond town, where pine trees climbed into a veil of early snow. Martha's office stood above the post office on Main Street, up a narrow staircase that smelled of old paper, floor polish, and radiator heat. Nathan took the steps slowly, one hand brushing the rail, Atlas following at his left knee with the quiet discipline of a working dog who understood that official buildings required patience. Martha Briggs was waiting with her door open. She was in her 60s, silver-haired, careful-eyed, wearing a green cardigan and the solemn expression of someone who had admired Evelyn Cole for too long to treat her last wishes like routine paperwork. "Nathan," she said, "I am sorry about your grandmother." He nodded once. Words crowded somewhere behind his ribs, but none of them seemed useful. Evelyn had been the kind of woman who never wasted speech. She made biscuits before sunrise, fixed loose buttons without being asked, and could tell whether a storm would bring snow or rain by the taste of the wind. Nathan had not seen her as much as he should have in the last year. Work, pride, distance, and the quiet shame of not having much to offer had all become excuses he had mistaken for reasons. Martha led him into a small conference room. On the table lay 3 things: a brass key on a faded red ribbon, a legal folder, and a cream-colored envelope with Nathan's name written in Evelyn's hand. Atlas entered the room and stopped immediately. His ears rose. His amber eyes fixed on the envelope, then on the key, then toward the window facing Cedar Ridge. Martha noticed. "Your grandmother mentioned him," she said softly. "Atlas." Nathan looked down at the dog, surprised. She had never met him, not really. Only once from the truck 2 summers ago. Martha sat and opened the folder. "Evelyn left the cabin on Cedar Ridge to you outright. The land around it is just under 9 acres, mostly timber and slope. There is no mortgage. Taxes are paid through the end of next year. Utilities are limited. The access road is rough, especially after snowfall." Nathan stared at the key. "I thought she sold that place years ago." Martha shook her head. "People thought many things about Evelyn. Most of them were wrong." She slid the envelope across the table. "She said I was to give you this only after you heard the cabin was yours." Nathan picked it up carefully. The paper was thick, old-fashioned, faintly scented with lavender and cedar smoke. He opened it and found a photograph of the cabin from years earlier, its green door bright beneath a roofline dusted with snow. Behind it, the mountain rose dark and still. Tucked behind the photo was a note in Evelyn's script, small but clear. "Atlas will hear what men buried." Nathan read the sentence twice. His throat tightened. Martha did not ask to see it. She only folded her hands and waited. Before Nathan could speak, footsteps sounded in the hallway outside, firm and familiar. Carl Whitaker appeared in the doorway without knocking, his tan coat open over a pressed shirt, his smile arranged like he had practiced it on the stairs. "Martha," he said, then looked at Nathan with mild surprise that did not reach his eyes. "I heard about Evelyn's cabin. Thought I might save everyone some trouble. That road is barely passable, the roof has problems, and winter will make it a liability." Nathan placed the note back into the envelope. Carl's gaze dropped to it for half a second, quick as a match being struck. "I can make a cash offer today," Carl continued. fair enough for a place that will cost more to repair than it is worth. Atlas stood then, not barking, not threatening, only standing between Nathan and the doorway with his ears high and his body still. The room seemed to tighten around that silence. Nathan looked from the key to the photograph, then toward the window where Cedar Ridge waited under a low gray sky. He had lost his job for refusing to lie about land. Now the same man who had fired him wanted his grandmother's cabin before Nathan had even touched the door. Nathan slid the key into his pocket. "No," he said quietly. Carl's smile thinned. "You should think carefully." "I am," Nathan said. For the first time that day, the cold place inside him warmed by a single degree. Atlas turned toward the mountain, and Nathan understood that the cabin was not the end of what he had lost. It was the beginning of what his grandmother had kept safe. Nathan left Martha Briggs's office with the brass key in his pocket, the photograph tucked inside his field jacket, and Atlas walking so close beside him that the dog's shoulder brushed his leg at every step. Down on Main Street, Cedar Hollow carried on as if nothing had happened. A delivery truck idled outside the diner. Two men in work coats stood beneath the hardware store awning, speaking in low voices that paused when Nathan passed. Across the street, the mill road climbed toward Whitaker Timber, where smoke still rose from the stacks and the afternoon shift would be sorting lumber under Carl's orders. Nathan did not look that way for long. He had given that place 2 years of honest work, and in return it had handed him a cardboard box, a final check, and a lesson his grandmother had tried to teach him since he was young: never let a small man make your conscience smaller. The November air had sharpened while he was upstairs. A thin snow had begun to fall, not enough to cover the road, just enough to cling to windshields, jacket shoulders, and the dark backs of the pine trees beyond town. Nathan loaded the legal folder into the old pickup, then unfolded Evelyn's photograph on the hood. The cabin looked younger in the picture, its green door freshly painted, its roof strong beneath a clean white cap of snow, its windows bright with lamplight. Behind it, Cedar Ridge rose steep and quiet, a wall of pine, stone, and cloud. On the back of the photograph, in the same careful handwriting as the note, Evelyn had written, "A mountain keeps what honest people cannot say out loud." Nathan read the line once, then looked toward the ridge. Atlas stood beside the truck, ears forward, nose lifting into the cold wind. He had not relaxed since Carl appeared at the attorney's office. Nathan opened the passenger door, and the German shepherd jumped in with the controlled strength of a working dog who understood that waiting was over. They stopped once at the gas station on the north side of town. Nathan filled only half the tank because half was what he could afford. Inside, he bought coffee, a pack of crackers, and a can of dog food, counting each dollar before placing it on the counter. The young clerk avoided mentioning the mill, but his eyes did that quick, uncomfortable thing people's eyes do when bad news has already outrun the person it belongs to. Nathan thanked him anyway. Outside, the wind carried the smell of diesel, wet asphalt, and far-off snow. He sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine, letting his hand rest on Atlas's neck. "We are not going up there for money," he said quietly. Atlas turned his amber eyes toward him, calm and certain. Nathan almost smiled. "No, you are right. We are going because she asked?" The road to Cedar Ridge began as county pavement, then became patched asphalt, then a narrow gravel track that climbed through timber and shadow. The pickup groaned in the turns, tires crunching over frozen ruts and pine needles. Snow gathered in the ditches. Water ran in silver threads over exposed rock. The higher they climbed, the more the world below disappeared, Cedar Hollow shrinking behind a veil of mist until the mill stacks looked like matchsticks in a gray bowl. Nathan drove slowly, one hand steady on the wheel, the other near the folded map Martha had copied from Evelyn's file. He knew terrain. The Army Corps of Engineers had taught him to read slope, drainage, soil, tree lean, and the quiet warnings hidden in water. Cedar Ridge was not simple land. It folded in on itself, ridges feeding gullies, gullies feeding narrow creeks, creeks disappearing beneath snow-laced stone. A report that ignored water here was not just lazy. It was intentional. That thought stayed with him as the truck climbed past a weathered sign half buried in brush: Coal Road, Private Drive. Nathan's throat tightened at the name. He had not been to the cabin since he was 12, maybe 13. He remembered Evelyn making cocoa on a black wood stove, her hands strong and quick, her gray braids swinging down her back as she told him that the mountain did not belong to people just because papers said so. "We borrow ground," she had said, setting a mug in front of him. "We are judged by how we return it." The memory faded when Atlas suddenly stood, front paws braced, body angled toward the windshield. Ahead, through the pines, a small clearing opened beneath the late afternoon sky. The cabin appeared slowly, as if the mountain revealed it only after deciding they had come with the right hearts. It was smaller than the photograph now, older, weather-worn, its green door faded almost blue, its roof dark with moss along one edge, its porch bowed but still standing. A little brass bell hung near the side window, blackened by age. The clearing smelled of cedar, cold ash, wet stone, and something else Nathan could not place at first, clean and mineral, like water flowing under rock. He parked near the porch and cut the engine. Silence rushed in. Not empty silence. Listening silence. Atlas leapt down, circled once, then went straight to the cabin steps. He did not sniff the trees or the porch rail. He did not wander. He stood before the green door and lifted his head toward the bell. Nathan climbed out slowly, the key warm in his palm despite the cold. The porch boards complained beneath his boots but held. When he slid the brass key into the lock, it turned with a stubborn scrape, then a soft click. The door opened inward, releasing air that smelled of cedar smoke, old wool, dried herbs, and years of careful waiting. Nathan stepped inside. Dust lay softly across the floorboards. A braided rug sat before the wood stove. A blue enamel kettle rested on the back burner. On the mantel above the small stone fireplace stood a framed photograph of Evelyn, older than he remembered her wanting to look, standing on the porch with one hand on the doorframe, and the other resting over her heart. Nathan removed his cap without thinking. Atlas entered behind him, then froze beside the kitchen. His ears rose. His nose lowered toward the floor near the wood stove. The little brass bell by the window rang once, although no wind had entered the room. Nathan turned sharply. The bell stilled. Atlas did not look at it. He was staring at the floorboards beneath the stove, listening as if the cabin itself had whispered his name. That first night, Nathan did not sleep in the bed. He did not feel ready to take that much from the cabin yet. He swept the main room, opened 2 windows for a few minutes to let the old air loosen, and built a small fire in the wood stove with split cedar stacked neatly beside the wall. Evelyn had left the place cleaner than age should have allowed. The shelves held labeled jars of tea, matches in a tin, folded towels, a sewing kit, and 3 cans of soup not yet expired. It was not abandonment. It was preparation. The thought settled over Nathan slowly while snow tapped against the glass and the fire found its voice. Atlas lay near the kitchen at first, but never fully rested. Every few minutes, his ears shifted toward the wood stove. Nathan warmed soup, fed the dog, and sat at the small table beneath the window where Evelyn had once taught him to carve a whistle from willow. The table still bore the faint line where his pocket knife had slipped as a boy. He touched the mark and felt the years between then and now fold together like a letter. Outside, Cedar Ridge moved into darkness. The pines became black shapes against a sky without stars. Somewhere below the cabin, water made a sound too faint to be called a stream, more like breath passing through stone. Nathan tried to tell himself every old cabin had noises. Wood settled. Pipes cooled. Wind found cracks. But the bell had rung without wind, and Atlas had not stopped listening. Near midnight, the fire lowered to red coals. Nathan wrapped himself in an old wool blanket from the cedar chest and leaned back in the chair, boots still on, jacket folded under his head. He had just begun to drift when Atlas stood. No warning bark. No sudden movement. Just the quiet rise of a dog whose whole body had become attention. Nathan opened his eyes. The room was dark except for the stove glow, a soft red light breathing across the floor. Atlas walked to the boards beside the wood stove and placed one paw on a narrow plank darker than the others. 3 short barks followed, low and measured. Nathan's chest tightened. He knew that signal. The same one Atlas had used after floods, after storms, after long searches when something hidden became something found. "Easy," Nathan whispered, but he was already on his feet. He knelt beside the dog and set his palm on the plank. At first he felt only cold. Then, beneath the wood, beneath the cabin, beneath the stone foundation, came the faintest vibration. Not random. Not the creak of settling timber. A flowing pulse, steady and alive. Nathan lowered his ear closer to the floor. Water. Somewhere below the kitchen, water was moving through the mountain with a rhythm too strong to belong to a shallow spring. He sat back slowly, remembering the missing survey numbers, Carl's impatience, Evelyn's note, and the way Atlas had heard Cedar Ridge before Nathan spoke its name. The fire popped softly in the stove. The little brass bell near the window gave one tiny sound, clearer this time, like a spoon touching glass. Nathan looked at Atlas. The dog's amber eyes shone in the red light, calm, certain, almost sorrowful. Whatever Evelyn had kept in this cabin was not behind a locked drawer or under a mattress. It was under the floor, under the place where she had cooked, prayed, waited, and guarded a truth too important to leave in the hands of men who measured land only by what they could take from it. By dawn, Nathan had not slept more than an hour, and even that hour felt borrowed from the cabin rather than given by rest. The fire had faded to gray ash inside the wood stove, leaving the room cold enough for his breath to rise in faint white threads. Outside, Cedar Ridge wore a thin skin of snow, softening the porch steps, the truck hood, and the pine branches that leaned close to the roof as if listening with him. Nathan sat at the kitchen table with Evelyn's note open beside the brass key, the photograph, and the final paycheck he had not yet cashed. The words seemed darker in morning light. Atlas will hear what men buried. Across the room, Atlas stood where he had stood most of the night, near the narrow plank beside the wood stove, his amber eyes focused downward, his sable and tan coat touched silver by the early light through the window. Nathan rose slowly, joints stiff from the chair, and crouched beside him. The floor felt colder there than anywhere else in the cabin. Not damp. Not rotten. Just cold in a way that belonged to stone chambers and deep shade. He pressed his palm flat against the plank and waited. At first there was only silence, then the faint pulse returned, steady, hidden, alive. Water moving under rock. Nathan had spent enough years studying drainage and foundation stress to know the difference between a small leak and a mountain vein. This was no stray trickle beneath an old cabin. This was a channel. Protected, directed, maybe even measured. He sat back and looked at the wood stove. It was old but not as heavy as the cast iron monsters some cabins carried, and Evelyn had placed it on a flat stone hearth that looked ordinary until Nathan noticed the clean line along the back edge. Too clean. He let the ash cool completely, then carried the stove tools outside, opened the windows, and worked with the patience of a man who understood that old houses punished force and rewarded listening. Atlas stayed near the kitchen doorway, alert but calm, as Nathan removed the stove pipe, shifted the small wood stove inch by inch onto folded burlap, and exposed the dark planks beneath it. There, hidden behind the shadow of the stove legs, was a brass screw head polished brighter than the rest of the floor. Then another. 4 in all, set in a rectangle around the darker plank. Nathan felt a slow pressure build behind his ribs. Evelyn had not simply hidden something. She had maintained it. The screws were old, but they were not frozen. Someone had loosened them before, oiled them maybe, then covered the evidence with a lifetime of ordinary living. Coffee. Soup. Prayer. Winter mornings. He went to the truck for his tool roll, passing the porch bell as it hung still beside the window. The clearing was quiet except for snow sliding from pine needles and soft little falls. Down the mountain, Cedar Hollow was waking. The mill would be starting again. Men would be clocking in, machines humming, Carl Whitaker speaking as if truth could be dismissed with a signature. Nathan looked toward the valley and felt no anger, only a clean, hard sadness. He had been fired for refusing to make land lie. His grandmother had left him land that seemed ready to speak. Back inside, he knelt and removed the screws one by one. Atlas moved closer with each turn, his nose low, his ears high. When the last screw came free, Nathan slid his fingers into the hairline gap and lifted. The plank rose easily, too easily for something supposedly untouched. Beneath it was not dirt, not insulation, not a shallow crawl space. A square wooden hatch sat within a stone frame, its surface dark with age, its iron ring folded flat. Carved into the wood, nearly hidden by dust, were 3 letters E, C, W. Nathan touched them with his thumb. Evelyn Cole Water. Or maybe Evelyn Cole's warning. He did not know yet. Atlas lowered his muzzle to the hatch and breathed in once, deeply. Then he gave a soft whine and sat back, as if the next step belonged to Nathan alone. Nathan looped a rope through the iron ring and pulled. The hatch resisted, then opened with a low wooden sigh, releasing a breath of air colder than the room, scented with wet stone, cedar, and mineral water. Below was a narrow set of stone steps descending into darkness beneath the cabin. Not a ladder. Not a hole. Steps, carefully built, worn in the center by feet that had come and gone for years. Nathan shone his flashlight down. The beam caught stone walls, a copper pipe, and far below, a glimmer of moving water. On the top step lay a small envelope sealed in wax, protected beneath a flat piece of glass. His name was written across it in Evelyn's hand. Nathan reached down, lifted it carefully, and opened it while Atlas watched without blinking. Inside was one sentence. If the mountain is still singing, then Cedar Hollow is still safe. Nathan did not step down right away. The stone stairway waited beneath the open hatch, narrow and cold, with the flashlight beam resting on its edges like pale water. He had learned long ago that hidden spaces deserve patience before courage. He opened both kitchen windows wider, propped the hatch with a piece of cedar, and gave the air below time to move. Atlas stood at the top step, nose lowered, breathing slowly, testing what Nathan could not measure with his own senses. The German shepherd did not pull back. He did not growl. After a full minute, he turned his amber eyes toward Nathan with calm certainty, and that was answer enough for the moment. Nathan tied one end of a rope to the iron leg of the wood stove and clipped the other to his belt, then tucked Evelyn's note inside his shirt pocket beside the final paycheck that suddenly felt less like failure and more like a receipt from a life he was leaving behind. If the mountain is still singing, then Cedar Hollow is still safe. The words had not explained anything, yet they had changed the room. The cabin no longer felt like a lonely inheritance from an old woman who had loved him. It felt like a watchtower disguised as a kitchen. Nathan switched on a second flashlight, set it on the floor facing down the steps, and descended slowly. The stone was dry under his boots, worn smooth in the center by years of careful use. Atlas waited until Nathan reached the 5th step, then followed, placing each paw with quiet discipline. The air grew colder as they went down, but not stale. Somewhere below, water moved steadily through rock, not rushing, not roaring, but singing in a low silver thread that seemed to pass through the bones of the cabin itself. At the bottom, the stairway opened into a chamber larger than Nathan expected, built from fieldstone and timber beams, with a packed clay floor and a shallow stone channel running through the far side. Clear water moved through that channel, bright under the flashlight, disappearing beneath the wall through a fitted grate of old iron. Copper pipes ran along one side, each tagged with small brass labels. Cedar Spring. North Vein. Town Line. Reserve Flow. Nathan stood still, trying to understand what his grandmother had built, or guarded, or inherited from someone before her. The room smelled of mineral water, cedar oil, cold stone, and old paper kept dry by stubborn care. Shelves lined the wall opposite the water channel. On them sat glass jars filled with folded maps, metal boxes with wax seals, notebooks, survey flags, and a small tape recorder wrapped in a towel. Atlas walked straight to a desk beneath the largest map and stopped beside it, nose hovering over a leather journal. Nathan lifted the journal carefully. The cover was cracked, but the pages inside were clean. On the first page, Evelyn had written, "For Nathan, when truth costs him more than silence would have." He lowered himself onto the wooden chair without meaning to. The simple sentence reached him harder than comfort would have. His grandmother had known the price of honesty, not because she had guessed the future, but because she had watched the same kind of men move through Cedar Hollow for years, smiling at meetings, buying land at quiet prices, calling people foolish when they refused to sell what mattered. Nathan turned the page. Evelyn's notes began 26 years earlier, after an early thaw nearly dried the lower creek that supplied half the town's old wells. She had discovered, with help from Nathan's grandfather and a retired county surveyor, that the springs beneath Cedar Ridge fed more of Cedar Hollow than anyone understood. The cabin sat above the control point where several mountain veins joined before slipping down toward the valley. If the land was cut wrong, drilled wrong, or claimed by the wrong company, the town could lose the cleanest water it had. Nathan looked toward the moving channel. The water was not hidden treasure in the way stories made treasure glitter. It was quieter than that. More necessary. A kind of mercy people used every day without knowing whom to thank. Atlas gave a low breath and nudged the metal file box on the lower shelf. Nathan opened it. Inside were copies of old water rights, county survey maps, handwritten statements, photographs of creek beds, and letters between Evelyn Cole and a group called the Cedar Hollow Water Trust. One letter carried Carl Whitaker's name, dated only 9 months earlier, offering to purchase the cabin and surrounding acreage for cash. Evelyn had circled one paragraph in red, where Carl described the land as commercially useless and hydrologically insignificant. In the margin, she had written, "A man who lies this neatly has practiced." Nathan felt the quiet anger rise again, but it did not scatter him. It focused him. He set the letter beside the map and followed the red lines with his flashlight. They matched the missing numbers from the report Carl had wanted him to sign. The erased data was here, preserved in his grandmother's stone room, under her kitchen, beneath the wood stove where she had made cocoa and prayed through winter storms. Atlas moved to the far corner and sat before the tape recorder. Nathan picked it up, found the cassette already inside, and pressed play. For a moment there was only soft static. Then Evelyn's voice entered the room, thin with age but steady as mountain stone. "Nathan, if you are hearing this, then Atlas brought you where I could not bring you myself." Evelyn's voice settled into the stone room like lamplight, gentle but impossible to ignore. Nathan stood beside the desk with one hand on the tape recorder and the other resting against Atlas's neck, feeling the German shepherd's steady warmth through the silence. The water in the channel moved behind them with a quiet silver rhythm, slipping beneath the iron grate and carrying the mountain's hidden song toward Cedar Hollow. For a few seconds, the old cassette hissed softly, and Nathan could almost picture his grandmother seated at the kitchen table above them, her gray braid over one shoulder, a cup of tea cooling near her hand, choosing each word with the same care she once used to mend his torn jacket sleeves when he was a boy. "I know you are angry," Evelyn said through the speaker, "and I know you are tired. Maybe both. But do not let either one drive you faster than wisdom can walk." Nathan closed his eyes. That sounded exactly like her. Not sentimental. Not dramatic. Just clear, practical mercy wrapped in a mountain woman's patience. The tape clicked faintly, then continued. "Carl Whitaker wanted this ridge before your grandfather was even gone. His father wanted it before him. They never cared about the cabin, not really. They cared about what runs under it. When the old county water maps disappeared from the public archive, I made copies. When survey markers were moved after storms that did not move them, I marked them again. When men came to my porch with checks and smiles, I poured coffee, listened, and sent them away with nothing." Nathan opened his eyes and looked at the wall-sized map. Red lines threaded through Cedar Ridge like veins through a living hand, some thick, some delicate, all leading down toward the town he had believed no longer had room for him. Evelyn's voice softened. "Your grandfather used to say the Lord hides great things in plain work. Bread. Water. A roof that does not leak. A dog who knows when to sit beside a hurting man. I did not understand how true that was until this mountain started telling me what people were trying to bury. Atlas lifted his head slightly at the sound of the word dog, and Nathan felt a faint ache rise in his chest, not pain exactly, but the pressure of being known by someone who was no longer alive. The tape continued. If you lost your job because you would not sign Carl's report, then you have already seen the edge of it. He needs the ridge declared safe for expanded cutting and access roads. He needs the water data softened. He needs the spring system to look smaller than it is. But water has a memory, Nathan. It remembers every cut, every pipe, every careless hand. If they open the wrong slope above the north vein, Cedar Hollow will not understand the loss until the wells run low and the creek tastes wrong. Nathan pulled the copied report from his field jacket pocket, the one Carl had tried to make him sign. His fingers moved over the missing sections, the blank spaces where numbers should have been, the smooth language that called unknown flow negligible, the clean lie dressed up as professional caution. He placed it beside Evelyn's maps, and the room seemed to answer without words. The missing numbers were not missing here. They were circled, dated, witnessed, measured across decades by Evelyn, his grandfather, and names Nathan recognized from old town signs, school plaques, and cemetery stones. People who had protected Cedar Hollow without needing anyone to clap for them. Atlas stepped to the lower shelf and nudged a second box with his nose. Nathan opened it and found photographs sealed in plastic sleeves. The creek and spring flood, the old pump house, survey flags along the ridge, Carl's trucks parked near boundary stakes years before he claimed any interest in the land. Beneath the photographs was a notarized statement from Evelyn, witnessed by Martha Briggs, explaining that the cabin property was to remain tied to the Cedar Hollow Water Trust if any unlawful pressure was placed on Nathan, or if any report attempted to erase the spring system from public record. The date was only 2 months old. Nathan sat slowly in the chair. 2 months ago, Evelyn had still been protecting him. The tape reached its final stretch. I am leaving you the cabin, but not as a burden. As a witness. Take the green file to Martha. Take the red map to the town council. Do not go alone if pride tells you to. Pride is useful for standing, not for carrying everything. Let Atlas lead you when your heart gets loud. He hears steadier than men do. The tape crackled, and Evelyn's voice grew thinner but warmer. And Nathan, if no one has said it since they pushed you out, I will say it now. You did right. A job can be taken. A name can be spoken against. But a clean conscience is land no one can buy from under you. The cassette clicked off. For a long while Nathan did not move. The water kept singing beneath the cabin. Atlas rested his chin on Nathan's knee, and above them, faint but clear through stone and timber, the little brass bell rang once in the empty kitchen. Nathan climbed out of the stone room with the green file under one arm, the red-marked map rolled carefully in his hand, and Atlas following close enough that the dog's breath warmed the back of his boot at each step. Morning had fully entered the cabin by then, thin and pale through the kitchen windows, touching the wood stove, the open hatch, the old braided rug, and the little brass bell that now hung motionless beside the glass as if it had spent its one clear note and returned to waiting. For a few minutes, Nathan stood in the kitchen without moving. Above him was the room where Evelyn had cooked, prayed, written letters, and kept her watch. Beneath him was the chamber where water moved through stone, carrying the quiet life of Cedar Hollow in channels most people had never seen. Between those two places stood Nathan, jobless, tired, and suddenly holding the kind of truth that could either heal a town or make powerful men very uncomfortable. He fed Atlas, warmed coffee on the wood stove, and laid the documents across the table in careful order. Green file. Red map. Photographs. Water rights. Evelyn's notarized statement. Carl's purchase offer. The report Nathan had refused to sign. Side by side, the papers told a story no one could pretend was coincidence. The missing numbers from Carl's report were present in Evelyn's records. The spring routes Carl had called insignificant were marked in decades of surveys. The ridge he wanted declared simple timberland was sitting over the cleanest water system Cedar Hollow had. Nathan took one long breath, then called Martha Briggs. She answered on the second ring, her voice still rough with early morning. Nathan, is everything all right? He looked at Atlas, who sat beside the table with solemn patience. No, he said quietly. But it can be. By noon, Martha was at the cabin, her green cardigan buttoned crookedly beneath a heavy coat, her boots dusted with snow from the porch. She did not speak when she first saw the open hatch. She only looked at Nathan, then at Atlas, then down into the stone stairway with the expression of someone whose legal training was standing at the edge of something older than law. Nathan led her below. The water channel was brighter in daylight, silver threads moving beneath the copper pipes, the brass labels catching the flashlight in small warm flashes. Martha walked slowly along the wall map, one gloved hand hovering near the red lines without touching them. When she reached the desk, Nathan played the final minute of Evelyn's tape again. Martha closed her eyes at the sound of the old woman's voice. When the tape clicked off, she removed her glasses and wiped them with a handkerchief though they were not wet. She made me witness that statement, Martha said. She told me it was for land protection, but she did not tell me about this room. Evelyn had a talent for giving people only as much as they could carry. Nathan almost smiled. That sounds like her. Martha spent the next hour photographing documents, checking seals, comparing dates, and making calls from the cabin porch where the signal was strongest. Her voice changed as she worked. It became firmer, cleaner, less like a woman reacting to surprise and more like an attorney preparing to place truth where it could not be brushed aside. She called the county clerk, then a retired hydrologist in Bozeman, then the chairwoman of the town council. By late afternoon, Cedar Hollow had begun to stir around a secret it did not yet understand. The emergency council meeting was held the next evening in the old school gym because the regular room above the fire station was too small for everyone who came. Farmers arrived in worn coats. Mill workers stood along the walls. The diner owner brought a thermos of coffee and paper cups. Carl Whitaker sat near the front with two men in suits, his face composed, his hands folded as if patience belonged to him by right. Nathan entered through the side door with Atlas at his left, and the red map in a long cardboard tube under his arm. Conversation softened, then stopped. He felt every eye in the room, including the eyes of men who had looked away from him at the mill. For one sharp second, the old shame tried to return. Then Atlas leaned gently against his leg, and Nathan remembered Evelyn's words. Pride is useful for standing, not for carrying everything. Martha spoke first. She did not accuse. She presented. Page by page, map by map, photograph by photograph, she showed Cedar Hollow what had been protected under Evelyn Cole's kitchen. When Nathan's unsigned report was placed beside the original water surveys, the silence in the gym changed from curiosity to understanding. Carl's expression did not break, but it hardened at the edges. The chairwoman asked Nathan if he wished to speak. He stood slowly. His voice was quiet, but it carried. I lost my job because I would not sign a report that left out what the land was saying. My grandmother kept the rest of the truth safe because she believed this town deserved clean water more than one man deserved control. He unrolled the red map across the council table. Atlas sat beside him, still as stone. No one moved for a long moment. Then an old mill worker in the back removed his cap, and one by one, others did the same, until the room felt less like a meeting and more like a promise being remembered. The promise did not become real all at once. It became real the way honest things often do, through signatures, meetings, phone calls, muddy boots, and people choosing to stand where they should have stood sooner. By the end of that council meeting, the chairwoman had ordered an independent review of Cedar Ridge, Martha Briggs had entered Evelyn Cole's documents into the public record, and the county clerk had agreed to preserve copies of the old water maps where no private company could quietly make them disappear. Carl Whitaker left before the meeting ended, his jaw tight, his two advisors walking close beside him, but no one followed. No one needed to. The room had already changed. Men who had avoided Nathan's eyes at the mill now stepped forward one by one, not with grand apologies, but with small, awkward words that carried more weight because they cost pride to speak. You did right, one said. Should have listened, said another. Nathan accepted each with a nod, not because the hurt had vanished, but because healing rarely comes as a flood. More often, it comes like mountain water, steady enough to carve stone if given time. Atlas stayed beside him through it all, calm and watchful, his sable antan coat bright under the gym lights, his amber eyes moving from face to face as if measuring whether the truth had finally landed safely. The investigation that followed was careful and public. The missing water data was restored. The expanded cutting plan was halted until proper protections could be written. Cedar Hollow Water Trust, nearly forgotten except in Evelyn's files, was renewed with Martha as legal advisor and 3 local families joining its board. Carl did not lose everything in some dramatic way. Life was not that simple. But he lost the quiet control he had almost gained, and perhaps that was the part that mattered. The ridge would not be sold in pieces to hide what ran beneath it. The cabin would remain tied to the trust, just as Evelyn intended. Nathan was offered his job back at the mill by a nervous manager who suddenly spoke of misunderstandings and administrative errors. Nathan listened politely, then declined. He had no bitterness in the answer, only clarity. A man can return to work, but not always to the place that asked him to trade his name for a paycheck. Winter settled over Cedar Ridge soon after, laying snow across the cabin roof and turning the pines into tall white sentries. Nathan spent the first weeks repairing what time had loosened. He patched the porch, resealed the windows, cleaned the stovepipe, and built a safer cover over the hidden hatch beneath the kitchen floor. Every morning, he walked the spring line with Atlas, checking markers Evelyn had placed years before, listening to the quiet run of water below stone. Sometimes he found himself speaking to his grandmother as he worked. Not in a way that needed an answer. Just enough to let gratitude have a voice. Martha helped him access the small maintenance fund Evelyn had left, and the town began bringing what it could. A retired plumber donated pipe. The diner owner sent soup every Friday. A church group brought blankets. 2 former mill workers who had also lost hours after speaking up came to help split wood, and Nathan never asked them to explain more than they wanted. By spring, the cabin was warmer, stronger, and no longer felt like a secret holding its breath. A simple sign went up near the green door, hand-carved by a local schoolteacher from Cedar Nathan had salvaged from the shed. It read Evelyn's Rest, a quiet place to begin again. The first guest was a former Marine named Thomas Avery, a gray-haired man from Billings who had been sleeping in his truck after losing work during the winter. He arrived with 1 duffel bag, 2 worn books, and the guarded expression of someone prepared to be disappointed. Nathan met him on the porch as sunset spilled gold across the snow melt, and the smell of cedar smoke drifted from the chimney. "You can stay here a while," Nathan said. "No speeches. No questions tonight. Just warmth." Thomas looked at the cabin, then at Atlas, who stepped forward and gently leaned against the man's leg. The old man lowered one hand to the dog's head and looked away toward the ridge, blinking hard. "Thank you," he said, and the words seemed to thaw something in the air between them. Months later, when summer came soft and green to Cedar Hollow, the spring water ran clear, the town wells held steady, and the cabin porch filled each evening with quiet conversation, coffee, and the kind of silence that no longer felt lonely. Nathan kept Evelyn's photograph on the mantel beside the brass key and the red map, not as trophies, but as reminders. He had arrived fired, nearly broke, and unsure where his name still belonged. He had found stone steps, hidden water, a grandmother's faith, and a dog who heard truth beneath the floor. One evening, as the sun lowered behind Cedar Ridge, Nathan sat on the porch with Atlas resting his head across his boots. The little brass bell by the window moved in a breeze so light it barely touched the trees, ringing once, clear and small. Below the cabin, the mountain water kept singing. Nathan closed his eyes and understood at last that Evelyn had not left him a place to escape the world. She had left him a place to return to it with his dignity whole.